Gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Capter, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks and place extraneous materials in the record.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise tonight as co-chair and founding member of the bipartisan 94-member Congressional Ukraine Caucus. Our caucus supports the immediate consideration of legislation that will provide further supplemental funding for Ukraine to support our partners in liberty against the aggression of Putin's tyranny. This is a moral struggle for liberty. It is in our era. Liberty faces a new era of conflict being forced upon the free world by a burgeoning access of tyranny and terrorism, including the likes of Russia, China, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Ukraine is the scrimmage line of that conflict for liberty. Their fight is our fight. The America I know does not cower in the face of tyranny. Many Americans believe that the history of the struggle against global tyranny ended with the defeat of Nazi Germany and the fall of the Soviet Union. I am here today to tell them that liberty's history is still being written. We face not a new enemy, but an old one. This is not a new struggle, but one which America and our alliances of free nations have fought for nearly a century. Ukraine has fought for its liberty for centuries. Let us not forget a key reason why there is a war in Ukraine. As the Soviet Union collapsed as a newly independent nation in 1991, it became the third largest nuclear power in the world. However, as a responsible nation, Ukraine signed the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Treaty at the behest of the United States and the demand of Russia, and gave up its stockpile of nuclear weapons. In exchange, Ukraine's security was to be guaranteed under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum signed by the United States, Russia, and the United Kingdom. However, Russia, even though it was the recipient of Ukraine's nuclear arsenal, betrayed its commitments when it invaded Ukraine in 2014. We must not betray ours. Ukraine has been building her fledgling democracy since 1991, following the collapse of the Soviet Union's tyranny that President Ronald Reagan called the evil empire. That remains one of the most consequential moments in world history. Liberty won. Ukraine has faced many challenges in her endeavor for liberty, steadfastly moving, however, to join the European Union of free nations, America's closest allies. To thwart Ukraine's desire for liberty and independence from Russia's malevolent influence, Putin first invaded Ukraine in 2014, 4 days after the end of Russia's hosting the International Sochi Olympics with all that fancy publicity. Now, 8 years later, Putin launched its war of unprovoked aggression on Ukraine in 2022. Much of the world was convinced there was no way the Ukrainian David could defeat a Russian Goliath. Ukraine's entire territory encompasses only 3% of the territory of Russia, and its population is only 25% of Russia's, and yet Ukraine fights and fights hard. She has never asked us to fight for her, only for global allies to arm her so she can defend herself. So far, we have done so, and to great effect. We must stay the course, not waver. President Zelensky, who is again visiting Washington today, and the Ukrainian people have stood up to Putin. Ukraine's valiant soldiers have actually moved their military to liberate 50% of all the territory that was once occupied by Russian tyranny and decimated as much as 40% of Russia's military capacity. It is important to put the resources that we have provided for Ukraine's defense against Russia into perspective. To date, Congress, in a repeated bipartisan fashion, has appropriated roughly $113 billion for Ukraine, of which every penny has been accounted for. Furthermore, we know that at least 60% of the money that is appropriated for Ukraine is spent right here in the United States, not in Ukraine, to purchase important commodities. It is funding that is going directly towards bolstering our diminished military industrial base and our American workforce benefits, including those in Lima, Ohio, which produces the greatest tank in the world, the Abrams tank. And every dollar spent is appropriately and closely accounted for to ensure none of the funds fall into the wrong hands. During the Cold War, we spent $13 trillion measured in 1996 dollars to combat Russian aggression, equivalent to $26 trillion today. The sum per year that we provide supporting Ukraine is no more than 20% of what we spent each year for 4 decades to contain Russia. America's alliance with our NATO partners has helped ensure European nations have bolstered our support to Ukraine with their own. And as a percent of GDP, 15 European countries have so far provided a higher level of aid to Ukraine than the United States. This is the costliest war in human casualties and plunder since World War II in Europe, the continent on which over 500,000 U.S. soldiers are buried from World War I and World War II. They bequeath liberty to us, and we must never fail their memory. The murderous dictatorships of Nazism, communism, and imperialism lay dead, and the 20th century's most consequential achievement was in fact that. But now, that cost in blood is being borne by Ukraine and the Ukrainian people alone. The fact remains that if America were to end its support of Ukraine, Russia would be able to defeat it. Putin is not counting the number of rubles or Russian lives he is spending on this conflict. What he is counting are the number of votes for Ukraine that remain in this U.S. Congress. He knows that American support will decide the victor of this conflict, and so should we. If Putin succeeds in Ukraine, or if we grow tired of a forever war we are not even fighting in, then we allow tyranny to ascend over liberty. Putin has made clear he would then test our resolve over smaller, much harder to defend NATO members, a move that would force the United States and our NATO allies into direct war with Russia. America and the free world have much at stake. As one European ambassador reminded me, there's an old saying that states, if you think you're an isolationist, if you take no interest in foreign affairs, take my word, foreign affairs will find you. We face a choice now. America can repeat the mistakes of the 1920s by withdrawing our nearly century-long support for liberty, inevitably forcing the free world to pay a higher price for freedom as tyranny deepens its roots in our world. Or America must take a stand now and provide further funding for Ukraine to help secure liberty for a new generation. I call upon the Speaker and my colleagues in the House to choose the path of liberty. Thank you, and I now yield 7 minutes to the honorable gentleman yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Madam Speaker, we are rapidly approaching the 2-year anniversary of Putin's illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine. The American people have responded with extraordinary support for Ukraine. Millions of Americans have donated their time, money to charitable organizations helping the Ukrainian people. Some have even volunteered to fight alongside Ukrainian defense forces. Congress has responded by providing over $50 billion security assistance and billions more in humanitarian assistance. These are unprecedented numbers, and it requires unprecedented oversight by Congress. I'm here to tell my colleagues who are concerned about where the money is going that we are doing that oversight. The Armed Services Committee has conducted vigorous oversight over U.S. military assistance to Ukraine. Every month since the war, the committee has held a classified briefing with DOD officials over Ukrainian aid. This morning, I was a member of a briefing that was the 12th in that series. We've also had multiple visits to sites in Europe where the aid is being staged to go into Ukraine. And we've held open hearings on the topic where we've heard from the DOD Inspector General. In the next couple of days, the House will take up the conference report on FY24 NDAA. That bill creates a special Solicitor General for Ukraine, dedicates $8 million to swiftly set up the office, and provides direct hiring authority to quickly staff it. We will continue to stay on top of this, but I want to assure my colleagues that there has been no evidence of diversion of weapons provided to Ukraine or any other assistance. What most folks don't realize is that the money DOD is spending on Ukraine is actually going toward creating high-skilled, good-paying jobs right here at home. The DOD so far has spent $45 billion on Ukraine-related security assistance. All of that money has been spent in the U.S. by U.S. companies supporting thousands of highly skilled American jobs. These include jobs in Arizona to build Stingers and Javelins, jobs in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, and Missouri to build ammunition, jobs in Texas, Florida, and Alabama to build Patriot missiles. It also includes over $3 billion to expand floor space, open new lines, and hire additional workers at weapons factories in Tennessee, Florida, Virginia, Missouri, and West Virginia. This investment in retooling and revitalizing our industrial defense base is helping us get ready for potential conflict with China. That's incredibly important. Equally important to deterring China is standing by our commitment to Ukraine. Walking away sends the wrong signals to President Xi and the Chinese Communist Party. Let's not do that. Let's quickly come to a compromise that secures our border and keeps our commitment to Ukraine. With that, Madam Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and yield 3 minutes to the esteemed ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Greg Meeks of New York.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to start by making clear that congressional support for Ukraine remains broad and bipartisan. We know from previous votes on the floor, amendments, and the standalone bill on Ukraine funding that assistance to Ukraine has overwhelming bipartisan support in Congress. And while I'm especially proud of the work the United States has done, President Biden has done, to build a global coalition in support of Ukraine, Congress's inability to pass a Ukraine supplemental is sending a dangerous message to the world that America cannot be relied upon as a partner. So the question for the Speaker now is, when will the House be allowed a vote to continue to support Ukraine? In these times of crises, leadership matters. And those of us who continue to stand against Vladimir Putin's aggression, who continue to stand with the brave Ukrainians fighting on the front lines, defending their democracy and their people, history will judge us favorably. But how will history judge those who have cynically chosen to use aid to Ukraine as a wedge issue, to play partisan politics with assistance meant to support Ukraine's fight against Russia's aggression? This is a critical moment for Ukraine and for this body. The administration's top national security officials have made clear that continued support is essential for Ukraine as it continues its fight. And we know the consequences if we cannot agree to additional funding for the arms they need to win, to the economic and development assistance that has been critical to Ukraine's livelihood. All of this will be impacted. And I think it's also important we are all working from the same set of facts. In particular, as I continue to hear from some of my colleagues who oppose Ukraine funding, they promulgate misinformation regarding the management of our assistance. The administration has instituted robust monitoring for all of the assistance we provide to Ukraine. The State Department, the Defense Department, and our Ukrainian partners are all ensuring this assistance is carefully tracked and accounted for. This misinformation both undermines Ukraine's courageous efforts while benefiting one person, Vladimir Putin. The world is watching, and what we say in this body and what we're able to pass has consequences. Our allies, including Finland and Sweden, where I recently visited, are proudly joining NATO. They are doing their part. The EU and partners across the globe are increasing commitments to help Ukraine. What signal does it send if the United States of America, the country that has led this coalition, is the first to step back? But it's not only friends that are watching, so are our foes. Putin wants us to get tired, to get distracted. The Kremlin is active in supporting anti-Ukraine candidates for any political strike, and China is strategically hedging its bets. The only person who thought this would be a small, victorious war and a quick war was Vladimir Putin. There's no simple, predictable end. But as long as Ukraine continues to push back Russia's brutal, unprovoked assault on our commitment to Ukraine should stand. And if the large bipartisan majority in this House that I know believes in standing there and believes in this commitment, if we stay united with all of our allies, we will prevail. And I yield back the balance of my time.
I yield the gentleman from Illinois, the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee of Appropriations, Mike Quigley of Chicago. Congressman Quigley, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once again, President Zelensky is in Washington to make the case for the survival of his country, to show the American people and Congress why this war is so important. But he shouldn't have to. As Americans, we have experienced fighting to save democracy and oppose tyranny. It's why we fought the Second World War. It's why we formed the United Nations. It's why we formed NATO. Right now, Ukraine is fighting for those principles. We owe it to our parents, to our grandparents, and great-grandparents who helped to help Ukraine defend against Putin's autocratic threat. We simply cannot stand by while a sovereign, democratic country is wiped off the face of the earth. Autocratic regimes around the world are watching to see how the U.S. responds to this conflict. So far, we have shown them what a united NATO, coupled with the bravery and determination of the Ukrainian people, can achieve in the face of tyranny. We must now continue to show them that that commitment is unshakable. When President Zelensky made his first visit to the U.S. last year, he emphasized the impact of this fight and what it will mean for generations to come. He said that Ukraine's struggle will define in what world our children and grandchildren will live. He was right. This fight for freedom and for democracy has never been partisan. Now should be no different. But in these months, we have seen alarming examples of a shift. This week, allies of Viktor Orban met with conservatives to push for an end to U.S. military support for Ukraine. Now, over the years, we've been warned of the far right's fascination with Orban and the influence he could impose on this policy. Obviously, these warnings were warranted. Ukraine's fight is our fight. Anyone who tells you otherwise isn't paying attention. I encourage them to imagine a world in which Putin is successful. Should we fail to aid Ukraine further, we will hand Putin a victory and he will expand his attacks. I've seen firsthand the devastation he has imposed in places like Bucha, maternity hospitals in ruins, and bodies piled in mass graves following the Russian army's onslaught. Our aid has contained this bloodshed for now, but Putin has plans far beyond Ukraine. If Putin were allowed to take Ukraine, he will seek to reconstitute the former Soviet Union. He would form a federation with Belarus and Ukraine by installing puppet governments and then target Moldova, the Baltics, Georgia, and others. Should Russia expand its attack and cross a border into one of these NATO countries, we are bound by Article 5 of the NATO Charter to defend them. The aid we have delivered has helped prevent this scenario from unfolding. But rest assured, Putin is patient. He has the time that Ukraine and apparently we lack. But Congress has been wasting that time we should have spent passing a supplemental package. Yet Congress's dysfunction has reared its ugly head. We have fumbled several opportunities to pass this funding. And there are those who argue that we must choose Ukraine or supporting Israel. Now they argue that we must choose Ukraine or our own border. These are false choices. In the words of NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, we have the capability and the strength to address different challenges at the same time. We don't have the luxury of choosing only one threat and one challenge. The conflict in Israel and the conflict in Ukraine are linked. After October 7th, Hamas and Iranian representatives met with Putin in Moscow. Just as Iran is supporting Hamas' attack on Israel, Iran is also assisting Putin in his invasion of Ukraine. To defeat the terrorist threat in Israel, we must also help Ukraine defend itself from an evil autocrat. When it comes to our border, Congress can and will tackle immigration reform and its international aid. In fact, we should be addressing both. But that means passing a clean supplemental and having a separate, broader conversation about our immigration system's needs. Rushed policy reforms are not the answer. When it comes to Ukraine, we are running out of time. What we do or what we don't do with the Ukraine aid will be one of the most important foreign policy votes we take in our lifetimes. We must do the right thing. The fate of the free world is hanging in the balance. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize for 3 minutes Congressman Joe Wilson of South Carolina and thank him for his leadership on his side of the aisle.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, for your leadership to promote the bipartisan remarks tonight, which reinforce really what former Chairman Greg Meeks has already stated, and that is there is overwhelming bipartisan support, Democrats and Republicans, to support the people of Ukraine as they will achieve victory over war criminal Putin. I support the supplemental with clear consistency. There should be security for all borders, American borders, Ukrainian borders, Israeli borders, Taiwanese borders, to achieve peace through strength to prevent global conflict. On February 24, 2022, war criminal Putin launched a full-scale mass murderous invasion of sovereign democratic Ukraine, claiming Ukraine does not exist. Patriotic Ukrainians, even grandmothers, raced to arm themselves and protect their land and families. The world underestimated the resolve of Ukrainians. I was in Kyiv in December 2021, prior to war criminal Putin's murderous invasion, when the planning was for resistance and guerrilla warfare, anticipating being overwhelmed. Ukraine valiantly fought back for freedom and proved the world wrong. It visited again in May this year and saw firsthand the courageous Ukrainians led by the very courageous President Vladimir Zelensky. Ukrainians are the front line in a conflict we did not choose, as we have dictators with rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. The axis of evil fights first for the death of Ukraine. Then there's the death of Israel. And then they chant death to America. All Americans should know we have a treaty obligation to support the territorial integrity of Ukraine. In 1994, with the signing of the Budapest Memorandum between the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Russian Federation, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees and territorial integrity. A consequence now, sadly, is that other countries will not give up nuclear weapon capabilities because Russia violates every treaty it signs. It is not realistic to believe that any peace can be achieved without full Ukrainian victory, which is territorial integrity. I appreciate that President Donald Trump worked to avoid the war criminal Putin invasion by providing Javelin missiles to Ukraine, placing American troops in Poland, and stopping Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which financed the dictatorship in Moscow. Just as America would fight for territorial integrity, as there is no state that we would abandon, and there's no state that would abandon a county. We know that appeasement to invaders would actually promote something warned by Speaker Mike Johnson. And he states, Speaker Johnson, that Putin would continue his deranged dream of a resurrected Soviet Union, threatening Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, and the NATO members Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, along with all of the countries of Central Asia. The Republican tradition has been bipartisan for peace through strength, with Eisenhower-Nixon, reinforced by Barry Goldwater. Why not victory over communism? As he also explained, the alternative of victory is defeat, and then the ultimate Ronald Reagan expression to our enemies: we win, you lose. This is why it's so critical that we commit today to protect the borders of America, Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan for peace through strength. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and wish to inquire of the Speaker how much time is remaining.
The gentleman has 35 minutes remaining.
The gentlewoman has 35 minutes remaining.
I thank the Speaker very much. Would like now to turn to Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady from Ohio for having this critical conversation today. Just outside this chamber, on January 20th, 1961, a new young president by the name of John F. Kennedy, just outside this chamber, said, "We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any foe to assure the survival and success of liberty. We would pay any price, bear any burden, and meet any hardship to assure the survival and success of liberty." What has happened to America that we shrink from our traditional role of standing up against tyrants and dictators and genocidal maniacs in the favor of liberty? What has happened to us? Why did Kennedy say those words? He didn't say those words because he wanted to replicate the pain and the tragedy of the World War in which he had distinguished himself as a war hero. He didn't say those words because he wanted young Americans to die in East Asia or around the globe in the service of the liberty. He said those words because he understood what he learned in the 1930s and the 1940s, which is that brutal dictators don't stop. They are stopped. They are stopped with those with the moral fortitude and courage to stop them. And if we accede to where half of the Republican majority is today, which is that we're not going to support Ukraine in this fight, Putin will not stop. And soon the United States will have no choice but to step in to stop Vladimir Putin. We hear these excuses. There's not enough accounting. There's not enough oversight. We didn't hear that when we were supporting the Afghani regime, profoundly corrupt. We didn't hear that about Iraq. We're only hearing that about Ukraine. We hear that we would like to know what the plan is for victory in Ukraine. Did anybody ask Winston Churchill, the hero of World War II, what his plan for victory was? No, they did not, because he wasn't sure. But we stood by him because he stood for liberty and he stood for the moral clarity that this institution has now lost. If we think for one moment that Putin is the only one who is enjoying this moment, think about what President Xi of China is learning. Think about what the Iranian mullahs are seeing. Think about what the North Korean dictator is coming to understand. That this Congress, when faced with the demand that we fight for liberty and freedom, we cut and run. That's what is being learned. And anybody who reads an iota of history will understand the tragedy that is behind that. It is time for this chamber to find an iota of the moral courage and clarity that John F. Kennedy elaborated just outside these doors. We do it because it is right, and we do it because if we fail the Ukrainians, it may be the next generation of Americans and Frenchmen and British who have to stop Putin. But be assured that we will have to do that later in far more tragic circumstances than we have right now to stop, as we are called to do, as John F. Kennedy called us to do, to stop the march of tyranny and stand up for liberty. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Thank you. I would now like to yield 3 minutes to one of our preeminent leaders here in the U.S. House, Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina. 3 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding me the time. Madam Speaker, shortly after the war in Ukraine began, I attended our annual pilgrimage commemorating Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama, along with Steny Hoyer. Just before our departure to return to Washington, I was approached by one of our honored foot soldiers of that march from Selma to Montgomery, who asked to have a private word with me. I assumed she wanted to discuss what we might or might not be doing about voting rights, which is always the major topic of that event. Instead, she shared her serious concerns about the war in Ukraine and stressed that it was Congress's responsibility to act in defense of democracy at home and abroad. I rise today to bring the concerns of that veteran of the war against voter suppression to the attention of this body. That longtime defender of our democracy here at home said to me that if we fail to do that which is necessary to stop Putin in Ukraine, we may soon find ourselves in need of defending our homeland. The failure to honor President Biden's supplemental request is endangering the safety and security of our closest allies. We need to do the right thing for freedom, for democracy, and for international stability before time runs out. The American people know that for the sake of our democracy, we can't let Putin win. This delay in funding is a gift to Putin, and every day that goes by without action strengthens his position and the resolve of other autocrats. History teaches us that there are global consequences when we allow dictators and would-be dictators to infringe on freedoms without opposition. Today, the front line is Ukraine. Tomorrow, it could be one of our NATO allies, requiring a higher price in treasure and American lives. We made a commitment to our friends in Israel. Also, we must support their efforts to eradicate Hamas, as well as provide necessary humanitarian assistance to the innocent Palestinians impacted by this conflict. This package will help accelerate efforts to ensure Israel's security and create space for stability in the region so we can begin in earnest the long process towards its two-state solution when this conflict ends. None of this will or can be possible until we honor our commitments to our allies. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman and yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Kentucky, Congressman Andy Barn, to say Kentucky and Ohio have sent so many soldiers to war, and we know we both benefit from their valorous service.
I thank my friend from Ohio for holding this bipartisan special order, because we should, in a bipartisan way, support the nation of Ukraine in a multilateral way, but we should also support a strategy of victory. Putin is evil. He's a war criminal. He kidnapped 30,000 children, killed women and children, bombed hospitals. He views himself as a reincarnation of Peter the Great. Putin will never stop. Moldova's next. Georgia's next. The Baltic is next. This is a conflict not just about territory, it's a confrontation between good versus evil, between the forces of democracy and the shadows of autocracy. By standing with Ukraine, we reaffirm our commitment to the fundamental principles of freedom and self-determination. But we have to provide Ukraine not just with a blank check, but with a strategy for victory. And that is why we call on the administration not just to support more security assistance, but also to reverse course on a misguided sanctions strategy that has failed. The G7 oil price cap strategy is a weak approach to depriving Putin of the funding that he needs. So yes, Congress should support security assistance, but we should also support a sanction strategy that will actually prevent Putin from selling fossil energy to China and India and other parts of the world. The price cap is not working. Russian crude is selling over the price cap. It's not enforceable. We need to eliminate the general license in the sanctions on Russian banks so that no energy-related transactions that are funding this brutal aggression against Ukraine can finance this war. And there's a lesson here that deterrence requires toughness. And when you remove sanctions, like this administration removed on Nord Stream 2, and when you're not tough on sanctions, that invites further aggression. So yes, security assistance. Yes, this Congress is prepared to act, but we want a strategy for victory for the Ukrainian freedom fighters, and that requires depriving Putin of the very financial support that is funding this war of aggression, and that is energy sales, and that's why we want a revisiting of the sanctions strategy. So with that, we must expedite delivery of lethal aid to Ukraine, reinforcing their ability to defend themselves and deter further aggression. And in doing so, we will uphold the values of democracy and freedom while safeguarding the stability and security of our partner in Ukraine. The cost is nothing compared to what the cost would be if there was an invasion of a NATO Article 5 partner where U.S. troops would be on the ground. So let's take the fight to him now, Putin now. Let's end this war by depriving him of the funding that he definitely needs to prosecute this war. And remember that weakness invites aggression. There is broader implications of this conflict. A further escalation, potentially drawing NATO into direct ground conflict, would be highly costly, much more costly than what we're talking about here. And providing Ukraine with the support now is not only an investment in Ukraine, but a critical step in preventing a larger, more devastating conflict that would require the involvement of U.S. troops on the ground, and it sends a signal to Beijing. Beijing is watching, and preventing and deterring Beijing from a cross-strait invasion is a dramatic return on investment. But let's pursue a strategy of victory, and let's get tough on sanctions. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and recognize our distinguished leader, Congressman Steny Hoyer, who has spent hours and hours and hours, days and weeks and months working on the issue of liberty across the European continent. Congressman Hoyer.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I thank her for taking this special order. I thank her for the extraordinary work she has put in over the years. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, President Zelensky, a brave leader of a determined people defending their democracy and international law, warned us today that the resources we sent his people in their fight for freedom have run out. 2 legislative days remain to deliver urgent aid to Ukraine and to Israel. If we leave town on Thursday, we will have to wait a month until we get another opportunity. Our allies cannot afford the wait. Neither can we. Our failure sends a dangerous message to the world about our commitment to freedom, democracy, and international law. Each week, reluctance over resolve. Each day, doubt over determination. Each hour, division over decisiveness. Each minute, continuation over conviction. Our allies watch in dismay, our adversaries in delight, as the beacon of democracy that is America dims in the face of the gathering storm. Instead, we must ensure that freedom's holy light continues to be bright. Winston Churchill understood that. Vladimir Zelensky understands that. Most members understand that. There is also an overwhelming consensus to support Israel in its imperative mission to defeat Hamas and ensure the devastating attacks of October 7th never occur again. If we do not pay the price of freedom with money and material now, then we may well pay it with American blood and lives later. We ought to be thankful that we have that choice. Our allies do not. Mr. Speaker, I just read a story about a Ukrainian deminer who lost his leg while clearing Russian mines in September 22nd. He is now out doing the same thing on his prosthetic leg. He risked life and limb, and he volunteered to do so again. The sacrifice this Congress must make pales in comparison. Mr. Speaker, I think of the mother in Western Ukraine I just read about, lost 2 sons. The burden we must bear does not compare to theirs. A significant majority of this House remains, as has been said by Republicans and Democrats, united in our determination to see Ukraine prevail. We came here not as Democrats or as Republicans, but as people who recognize this threat for what it exists, an existential one. We are the majority in this House. Until the Speaker gives us clean vote, however, we cannot act on this consensus. Madam Speaker, the Speaker introduced a bill in the 115th Congress, said 1 subject per bill. Mr. Speaker, follow that premise that you asked us to support. I urge the Speaker not to allow an important but unrelated goal to prevent us from doing what is necessary to achieve a victory for our own national security and the security of the free world. Politics should stop at the water's edge, because this sort of partisanship emboldens the enemies of freedom to set their sights on our own shores. Rather than sending the despots and dictators of the world a signal of retreat, let's send them a clear and unambiguous message: we will not shrink from this challenge. Our action is not worthy of the land of the free and the home of the brave. America is better than that, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman for his decades of leadership. Madam Speaker, may we ask time remaining?
The gentlelady has 18 minutes remaining.
Okay. Now it is my great privilege to yield to the Speaker Emerita of the United States House of Representatives, Speaker Nancy Pelosi of California.
Thank you very much. I thank the gentlewoman for yielding and for her tremendous leadership over a long period of time with as a great intellectual resource to helping Ukraine. Thank you very much for your leadership, Marcy Kaptur. Nearly 1 year ago, many of you will recall, in this chamber, we had a joint session of Congress. We were honored by the presence of President Zelensky, who came directly from the battlefield, brought us a flag signed by the soldiers, and delivered a magnificent speech. President Zelensky made clear the necessity of American support by saying, your money is not charity, it is investment in the global security and in democracy. And the fight of the Ukrainian people for democracy is just remarkable to behold. But their fight is for their democracy and ours as well. Indeed, powered by the investment we made last Congress, passed by an overwhelming bicameral vote, Ukraine has battled historically against the tide of the biggest army in Europe, the Russian army. It is important for the American people to know that Ukraine has reclaimed, won back, 50% of the land previously seized by the Russians. Won back 50%. More than 60%, close to 2/3 of the money that we have invested in military assistance for the Ukrainians has been spent in the United States. Creating jobs here as we support the Ukrainians. And that's 50% of the land, nearly 2/3 of the money and spent here, and 100% of the determination that victory will belong to the Ukrainian people. Others have mentioned, Mr. Hoyer included, at the same time our hearts break when we hear about the atrocities committed against women by Putin's forces. Women are subjected to rape as a weapon of war, murdered in front of their parents or in front of their children, raped in the same way, tens of thousands of children kidnapped by the Russian soldiers, tens of thousands. I said to someone who knows about these things, isn't it sad, the brutality of war that has turned these soldiers into brutes? And they said, make no mistake, the Russian soldiers do what they are ordered to do. These rapes, these kidnappings, these murders of families in front of family members are the direct order of Vladimir Putin, a very evil person. And we must put an end to this unadulterated evil. The longer we wait to get the money, more people will die, more children will be kidnapped, more women will be raped, and more uncertainty will be injected into the situation as to whether we are there to protect democracy and to support it. As the war wages on, the administration has repeatedly made clear America is at the end of the supply of money we have voted, and Ukraine is nearly out of time. Today, President Zelensky returned to the Capitol to make a compelling case for America's continued support to help Ukraine finish the fight. Because the battle for Ukraine, again, is a battle for democracy itself, and we will not let death, destruction, and dictatorship of Vladimir Putin prevail. President Biden's fundamental supplemental funding request must be brought to the floor as soon as possible so that we honor our duty to stand with the Ukrainian people until victory is won. And it has been said on both sides of the aisle, the cost of war is great. Should Putin prevail and then go on to other invasions of NATO or non-NATO countries, it'll only cost more money, more lives, more families separated. That cannot be what we are about. At the same time, this legislation calls for us to honor a commitment to peace in the Middle East by our support for Israel and the humanitarian assistance that is in the legislation for the Palestinian people, as well as others. With that, again, I thank you for your leadership, for taking the special order, for yielding time, and yield back mine. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady and thank every member on both sides of the aisle that has spent this much time today in furtherance of this very noble objective so Ukraine wins and wins soon. I would now like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Congresswoman Madeline Dean, a very hard-working member of our caucus.
I thank you, Representative Kaptur, for all your extraordinary work for Ukraine. Many Congresses over, and especially now, since the brutal invasion. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It has been more than 650 days since Putin's illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine, the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. And today, President Zelensky visits the United States yet again to call upon us to continue to lead. The United States, President Biden, has led a coalition of more than 50 nations to provide Ukraine with the resources to protect its people, its land, its democracy, its sovereignty. The United States is leading, and we cannot abandon Ukraine now. The war has taken more than 22,000 of Ukraine's men, women, and children in the brutal, harshest ways, as the Speaker Emerita just detailed. We cannot abandon Ukraine now, because Ukraine's fight is our fight. We must pass the supplemental funding package currently sitting in the Senate. It is unconscionable of us to go home for holidays without doing that. Without it, we impede Ukraine's ability to win. At the same time, I hope everyone understands that we weaken our own military readiness and our own national security. Because not only does this legislation include crucial funding for ammunition and intelligence for Ukraine, but it invests in our own military. $43.6 billion to increase our weapons capacity, including $24.5 billion to replenish U.S. weaponry supply. We must not abandon Ukraine now, because to do so would be a failure to protect a young democracy. To do so would be a threat to our own military readiness, to our own national security. and to do so would be a failure of the United States to lead. And that is simply unacceptable. It is un-American. I yield back.
I would now like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Congressman John Garamendi, a leader on so many fronts here in the Congress, including Ukraine.
Madam Speaker, my friend Marcy, thank you. I've listened to this debate, and as it's gone on, I'm becoming more and more depressed that we do not have the courage, to continue to support Ukraine. Why? What is going on here? I want us just to think for a moment about the blood that's been spilled by the Ukrainians trying to protect their democracy. For more than almost 2 years now, they have fought every way to protect themselves. The women and children and men and women of Ukraine are dying, and we're sitting here doing nothing. This is a disgrace. There's no other way to describe it. Holding Ukraine hostage for an unnecessary change in the asylum laws is absolutely wrong. Yes, we do need to deal with immigration, but at the price of Ukraine, at the price of the women, the children, the incoming missiles from Russia. Putin is having a glorious day, and we are a disgrace. There's no other way to describe it. That the most powerful nation in the world is unwilling to stand up to continue to support Ukraine in its hour of need. Who are we that we are unwilling to do this? For what? Did anybody in this House actually read H.R. 2, the asylum legislation? 80% of it is downright foolish. Is there a compromise available? Absolutely. Who's working on it in this House? Show me one member of this House that's working on a compromise on that. I don't know who they are. Speaker Johnson, where are you? Where are you hiding? Where is your leadership? Ukraine is at risk. Think about it. It'll be a month and a half before any legislation will pass this House, if in fact we get our act together over the holidays. What will happen? The Ukraine government depends upon the American money to pay whom? The police, the firemen, the first responders. They won't have that money. And the military, the flow of equipment, the flow of ammunition, it will diminish. And how do they get started? How are they going to replenish? It's time for us to stand. It's time for us to act. We have 1.5 days to do it. Can we do it? You're damn right we can do it, if we find the courage to do it. If we find the very same courage that President Zelensky has exhibited over the last 2 years, and more importantly, the men and women of Ukraine that are fighting a desperate fight for their own future. I wonder if we have the courage. I know I have to stand down. I know the people of Ukraine will never stand down. The question is whether we will stand with them. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and ask the Speaker for time remaining, please.
Gentlewoman has 6 minutes remaining.
All right, the gentleman from Ohio, Congressman Greg Landsman of Cincinnati, a distinguished member of our Congress. We yield him 2 minutes. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you to my very good friend and colleague from the great state of Ohio, Marcy Kaptur. Your leadership on this is remarkable. I, too, rise today in support of Ukraine and its fight against tyranny. Imagine where we would be, the global community, had the United States and Europe joined forces in 1939 to stop Hitler when he invaded Poland. Imagine that. The world is watching us now, and Russia wants nothing more than for the United States and our allies to abandon Ukraine. That is the big win for Putin. Abandoning Ukraine would give Putin and his despots like him the green light to further their wars of imperialism and expansion. And history, as I mentioned, shows us that appeasing autocrats has devastating consequences. Doing so could draw the United States and our allies into direct conflict, putting American troops in harm's way. Ukraine is fighting for its survival. Eastern Europe is fighting for its survival. The United States, in partnership with our allies, must stand firm by Ukraine's side as it fights to defend its freedom, its sovereignty, and its future. We have to pass a budget. We have to pass this much-needed investment in our global partners, and we can if and when the Speaker realizes how serious of a moment this is and decides to be serious and bring us a bipartisan bill which will pass overwhelmingly. With that, I yield back.
I would now like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Steve Cohen, such a phenomenal leader in the law and on almost every subject we deal with here.
Thank you, Ms. Capter. It's been said that everything has been said, but not everybody's said it. And everything really has been said, and I've heard such great oratory and such passionate, patriotic speakers. But what's clear is we have a duty as the leader of democracy in the world to support our friends and to fight for democracy in Ukraine, where they are defending democracy and keeping us from having to go in if Putin wins and gets into a NATO country, and saving our soldiers' blood and lives. And that will happen. And in Israel, where a similar foe, Hamas, like Russia, knows no limits, is threatening the existence of Israel. Now, I know the Speaker believes that we should support Israel. And when he was first elected, he went to the podium and he said, "We will support Israel." But later he said, we'll only support Israel if we cut $15 billion from the IRS and the budget, which would lose us $85 billion overall. Fiscally foolish and morally wrong. Israel should be supported unconditionally. And so should Ukraine. Two valiant countries whose existence has been threatened. These are existential fights for Israel and for Ukraine. What happened in Bucha right after the war started, before the Ukrainians were able to repel the Russians, was similar to what happened on October 7 in Israel. Murders, rapes, crime. If we allow Russia to win, which we will if we don't support Ukraine, there will be 3, 4, 5, 10 times what happened October 7 in Israel to happen to the women and the children of Ukraine. Because Russians showed they have no respect for women, morality, or mankind. So I urge Speaker Johnson to put these bills on the floor to support Ukraine, to support Israel, to support Taiwan, to support democracy, and to support human relief in Gaza for people who have been victims of innocent victims. Please put these bills on the floor and let us do what America needs to do. I yield back the balance of my time.
Madam Speaker, I would like to inquire remaining time.
The gentlewoman has 1 minute remaining.
Oh, dear. We have you and Josh Gottheimer. Oh, my. Where's Josh? I am forced to yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Texas, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who has been at almost every meeting we have held on Ukraine, and then we will yield 30 seconds to, Congressman Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey, a leader on both sides of the aisle. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, thank you, and thank you to my great colleague for her great leadership. I stand here for the children. We must stand for the children. A little boy riding with his grandmother, Oleksandr Ivanov, was killed by the Russians, and more children have been killed in all the conflicts that are going on. We must move forward so that the humanitarian aid comes along with the aid that is needed to fight the Russians, who have lost 87% of their military since they started. This can be winnable for the children, humanitarian aid in all the wars that are now going on, and I want to stand for that fight. The bill named after Oleksandr Ivanov is to protect our children wherever they are, humanitarian aid and war aid, to ensure that the wars that are going on, that the children are our priority. And I hope that this fight will be won, and we will win for democracy, and we'll win for our children. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Congresswoman Kaptur. Israel and Ukraine may be 2,000 miles apart, but the evils they face are connected. Hamas and Putin have waged unprovoked wars on neighboring democracies, murdering thousands of civilians and kidnapping innocent people, including children. Recently, Moscow hosted Hamas and Iranian leaders. This is incredibly concerning because Hamas is funded by Russia's military ally, Iran. I fear the extreme ultra-right wing wants to cut and run and hand Putin a win. It sends the wrong message to China and empowers our adversaries. The United States has a responsibility to support Ukraine in its fight against a murdering dictator and provide the support Israel needs to kill the terrorists responsible for the atrocities on October 7th. Hamas terrorists have even made it clear they will not back down and are committed to a second, third, and fourth October 7th. We must pass bipartisan supplemental aid package that makes sure that we do not ever send the wrong signal. This is about fighting against terror and protecting global democracy and our national security. Thank you, and I yield back.
I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order.
Without objection.
I thank the Speaker. I make a plea to Speaker Johnson and our colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Please give Vladimir Putin no succor. Stand up for liberty. This is the moment for Ukraine. Let us seize it. Let us seize it. And I would ask unanimous consent, Madam Speaker, that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material in the record.
Without objection.